Hey there, night owls and history buffs. Ready to drift off into the past with something a little grim, a little gross, and a whole lot confusing? Tonight, we're stepping into the blood-soaked, bewildering world of Victorian medicine. This isn't the tidy, white-coated doctor's office you're used to. No, being a Victorian doctor was like signing up for a career in chaos, where your tools were rusty, your knowledge was shaky, and your patients were as likely to die from your cure as from their disease. So, settle into your cozy modern bed, far cleaner than anything the Victorians slept on, and let's take a journey into the messy, murky, and downright bizarre world of 19th century medicine. Trust me, you'll be glad you live in a world with antibiotics and anesthesia by the time we're done. Picture this. It's 1845, and you've just woken up in London as a freshly minted Victorian doctor. Congratulations. You've got a medical degree which sounds impressive until you realize it's basically a fancy piece of paper proving you survived a few lectures and maybe dissected a stolen corpse or two. Medical schools in the Victorian era were a mixed bag. Some were rigorous, others were basically diploma mills. You might have studied at a prestigious place like Edinburgh or Guy's Hospital, but even then, your education was more about memorizing Latin names for diseases than understanding how the body actually worked. Germ theory? Not a thing yet. Antibiotics? Decades away. Your medical toolkit is a leather bag stuffed with scalpels, a stethoscope that's more decorative than functional, and a bottle of laudanum you're a bit too fond of yourself. Your office, if you're lucky, is a damp room in a soot-covered building, reeking of coal smoke and desperation. If you're less lucky, you're making house calls in a slum, wading through streets slick with sewage and despair. Your patients? They're everyone from wealthy aristocrats with gout to factory workers coughing up blood. The Victorian era, roughly 1837 to 1901, was a time of massive change. Industrialization, urbanization, and a population boom meant more people, more cities, and more disease. Cities like London were bursting at the seams, with overcrowded tenements breeding cholera, tuberculosis, and typhus like it was their job. As a doctor, you're on the front lines of this biological battlefield, but you're armed with theories that are, at best, wildly misguided and, at worst, straight-up deadly. The prevailing medical idea of the day is the miasma theory. Disease comes from bad air, those foul smells wafting from open sewers or decaying matter. So, instead of washing your hands, you're more likely to burn incense or tell your patient to move to the countryside for fresh air. Spoiler, neither of those works. Let's start your day. It's 6 a.m. and you're called to a tenement where a family of 8 is crammed into one room, and half of them are sick. The mother's got a fever, the kids are coughing, and the baby's got a rash that looks like a map of the British Empire. You open your bag, pull out a lancet, and decide it's time for bloodletting. What? Because everyone's still obsessed with the ancient idea of balancing the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much blood, they think, causes fever, so you slice open a vein and let it flow into a bowl. The patient gets paler, weaker, and, surprise, doesn't get better. But you're not worried, you've done what the textbooks told you. If they die, well, that's just God's will, right? You wipe your bloody hands on your coat, which you haven't washed in weeks, and move on to the next patient. Speaking of that coat, it's basically a biohazard. Victorian doctors didn't know about germs, so hygiene wasn't a priority. Your surgical apron is stiff with dried blood and pus, and you wear it like a badge of honor. Washing instruments? That's for amateurs. You might rinse your scalpel in water, if you're feeling fancy, but sterilization is a foreign concept. Hospitals, if you work in one, are death traps. They're packed with patients, many of whom are there for surgery, that's more like butchery. Amputations are common, especially for factory workers mangled by machinery. You saw through bone with a dull blade, no anesthesia, just a stick for the patient to bite and a bottle of whiskey if they're lucky. The screams are deafening and the survival rate is abysmal. About half die from infection, which you blame on bad air rather than your unwashed hands. But let's not get too grim yet. You're a doctor after all, and you've got other tricks up your sleeve. For instance, there's your trusty bottle of laudanum, an opium tincture you prescribe for everything from toothaches to female hysteria. Got a crying baby? Laudanum. Got a patient with diarrhea? Laudanum. Got a headache yourself? You guessed it, laudanum. It's addictive, sure, but addiction isn't a concept you're trained to recognize. You just know it makes people quiet, and that's good enough. Then there's mercury, which you use for syphilis, skin rashes, or just because it sounds scientific. Never mind that it causes tremors, tooth loss, and kidney failure. It's a powerful remedy, and that's what counts. Your day isn't just about blood and drugs, though. You're also a scientist, or at least you think you are. Victorian doctors loved experimenting, often on their patients. You might try a new electric therapy machine that shocks your patient into a stupor, hoping it cures their nervous condition. Or maybe you're dosing them with arsenic. Yes, arsenic, for strengthening the constitution. These treatments are based on wild guesses, old traditions, and a touch of showmanship. Medicine is as much theater as science, and you've got to sell your expertise to keep patients coming back. You might even advertise your services in the newspaper, promising to cure all ailments with your patented tonic, which is probably just sugar water spiked with alcohol. By midday you're exhausted, but there's no lunch break. You grab a pie from a street vendor, ignoring the fact that it's probably made with questionable meat, and head to your next call. This time, it's a wealthy patient with consumption, tuberculosis. You prescribe a trip to the seaside and some cod liver oil, knowing full well it won't help. Tuberculosis is a death sentence for most, but you can't admit that, it'd ruin your reputation. Instead, you nod sagely, scribble a prescription, and pocket your fee. Class matters in Victorian medicine. The rich get house calls and your best bedside manner. The poor get a quick visit in a charity ward if they're lucky. As the day wears on, you might visit a workhouse hospital, where the poorest of the poor are treated. These places are grim, overcrowded, underfunded, and staffed by nurses who are often untrained and overworked. You see patients with scurvy, rickets, and smallpox, diseases thriving in the poverty of Victorian slums. You do what you can, which isn't much. You might recommend fresh air or a nourishing diet, fully aware your patients can't afford either. The workhouse is a stark reminder of the era's inequality. Medicine is a luxury and survival is a privilege. By evening, you're back at your desk, writing up patient notes by candlelight. Your handwriting is terrible, but it doesn't matter. No one's suing for malpractice yet. You might read the latest medical journal, which is full of debates about whether chloroform is safe. It's not, but you use it anyway, or whether hysteria is caused by a wandering womb. Spoiler, it's not. You're part of a profession that's advancing, but oh so slowly. The Victorian era is a turning point. By its end, germ theory and anesthesia will start to change everything, but right now you're stuck in a world where medicine is as much guesswork as gospel. Alright, let's dive back into the grimy world of Victorian medicine, where you're still trudging through your day as a doctor in 1845 London. The candlelight is flickering, your hands are stained with who knows what, and your patients are still clinging to life despite your best efforts. But now, let's talk about one of the most confusing parts of your job: diagnosing disease. In the Victorian era, figuring out what's wrong with someone is like solving a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half covered in blood. You've got no x-rays, no blood tests, no idea what a virus is. Your diagnostic tools are your eyes, your ears, a stethoscope that's basically a glorified ear trumpet, and a whole lot of guesswork. Let's walk through a typical case and see why being a Victorian doctor feels like playing medical roulette. You're called to a patient's home, a middle-class merchant with a persistent cough and a fever that won't quit. He's sweating through his nightshirt, his wife is wringing her hands, and the room smells like damp wool and despair. You listen to his chest, which sounds like a kettle boiling over, and check his pulse, which is racing. Your first thought? It's probably phthisis, tuberculosis, but it could also be typhus, pneumonia, or just general debility, whatever that means. Diseases don't come with clear labels in the Victorian era. Symptoms overlap, and your medical books are full of vague terms like fever, dropsy, or nervous exhaustion. You might decide it's a case of bilious fever, which is less a diagnosis and more a fancy way of saying, I don't know, but his skin looks yellowish. You prescribe a purgative, maybe some calomel, a mercury-based laxative, because clearing the bowels is the Victorian equivalent of a factory reset. If that doesn't work, you might try leeches to reduce the inflammation. The patient's wife nods approvingly. After all, you're doing something, and that's what counts. But here's the kicker: your diagnosis is probably wrong. Without germ theory, you're not looking for bacteria or viruses. You're looking for imbalances in the body or miasmatic influences. If the patient lives near a river or a slaughterhouse, you might blame the noxious vapors in the air. If they're a woman, you might diagnose hysteria, a catch-all for anything from depression to menstrual cramps. Hysteria is a Victorian doctor's favorite fallback, especially for female patients. Symptoms like fainting, irritability, or just talking too much could land a woman in a cold bath, a dose of laudanum, or, in extreme cases, an asylum. You don't question it, it's just science, right? Except it's not. It's a mix of tradition, superstition, and a dash of sexism wrapped in a medical degree. Let's not forget the tools you're working with. Your stethoscope, invented in 1816, is a newfangled gadget, but it's clunky and hard to use. You press it against the patient's chest, hoping to hear something useful, but mostly you get muffled thumps and your own heartbeat. If you're feeling particularly modern, you might use a thermometer, but they're not standard yet and they take forever to give a reading. Most of the time you rely on physical signs. Is the tongue coated? Are the eyes sunken? Is the patient languid? These are your clues, and they're about as reliable as reading tea leaves. If you're lucky, you might consult a medical textbook, but those are often outdated, contradictory, or written by someone who's never seen a patient. One book might say to bleed the patient, another says to give them brandy. You pick one and hope for the best. Now let's talk about the diseases you're up against. Victorian England is a petri dish of horrors. Cholera is a big one, waterborne, deadly, and terrifyingly fast. It can kill in hours, leaving patients dehydrated and blue, but you don't know it's caused by contaminated water. You might recommend cholera belts, tight fabric wraps to keep the disease out, or a dose of opium to slow the diarrhea. Neither helps, and the patient's gone by morning. Then there's smallpox, which leaves patients scarred and blind, if they survive. Vaccination exists thanks to Edward Jenner, but it's not mandatory yet, and many distrust it. You might vaccinate a patient with cowpox matter scraped from a cow's udder, but good luck convincing them it's safe. Tuberculosis, or consumption, is another killer, romanticized in literature as a disease of delicate poets, but in reality a brutal, coughing death. You can't cure it, only manage symptoms with useless tonics or a trip to a sanatorium if the patient can afford it. Your afternoon takes a turn when you're called to perform a surgery. Surgery in the Victorian era is not for the faint of heart. Let's say it's an amputation, a common procedure for crushed limbs or gangrene. You head to the hospital, where the operating theater is less sterile room and more crowded amphitheater. Medical students and curious onlookers pack the benches, smoking pipes and eating snacks while you work. The patient, a factory worker who got his arm caught in a machine, is strapped to a wooden table. You've got chloroform, which is a recent invention, but it's tricky to use. Too little and the patient wakes up screaming, too much and they don't wake up at all. You pour some on a rag, hold it over their face and hope you've got the dose right. Then you grab your saw. The blade's dull, the bone's tough, and the patient's blood is spraying like a fountain. You work fast. Speed is your only defense against shock and blood loss, but infection is almost guaranteed. You stitch the stump with catgut, wrap it in a bandage, and send the patient to the ward, where they'll probably develop hospital fever, sepsis, and die within days. Back at your office, you're faced with another uniquely Victorian problem: patent medicines. These are the snake oils of the era, sold by quacks and pharmacists alike. Bottles labeled Dr. Smith's Miracle Cure or Lydia Pinkham's Vegetable Compound promise to fix everything from baldness to weak nerves. You know most of them are useless: alcohol, sugar, and maybe a pinch of cocaine, but patients love them and sometimes you prescribe them just to keep people happy. After all, medicine is a business and you've got bills to pay. The line between doctor and salesman is blurry, and you're not above recommending a tonic if it means a repeat visit. As the day winds down, you reflect on your profession. Being a Victorian doctor is prestigious, sure, but it's also exhausting and frustrating. You're expected to be a healer, a scientist, and a gentleman, all while navigating a world where half your patients die, and the other half can't pay. You're caught between old traditions, like bloodletting and humoral theory, and new ideas like the early stirrings of germ theory. Scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister are starting to make waves, but their ideas are controversial, and most doctors dismiss them as nonsense. You might experiment with carbolic acid sprays during surgery, as Lister suggests, but it's a hassle and you're not convinced it works. By nightfall, you're bone-tired, your coat smells like a slaughterhouse, and you've seen enough suffering to last a lifetime. But you're not done yet. There's a stack of bills to pay, a medical journal to skim, and another patient knocking at your door. A child with diphtheria, a disease that chokes its victims with a thick membrane in the throat. You know there's little you can do, but you grab your bag and head out anyway. That's the life of a Victorian doctor, equal parts hope, hustle, and heartbreak. Let's slip back into the blood-stained boots of our Victorian doctor, trudging through the foggy streets of 1845 London. The night is closing in, and you're bone-weary from a day of dubious diagnoses and gruesome surgeries, but the job never stops. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most perplexing and downright bizarre aspects of your work: treating mental ailments. In the Victorian era, the mind is a mystery wrapped in a riddle, and your attempts to treat it are equal parts science, superstition, and social control. Buckle up, because this is where things get especially weird and a little unsettling. You're summoned to a well-to-do household where a young woman, let's call her Eliza, is not herself. Her family says she's been moody, refusing to eat, and talking back, classic signs of what you've been taught to call hysteria. The term is a catch-all, thrown around like confetti for any woman who doesn't fit the mold of docile Victorian femininity. Eliza might be depressed, anxious, or just fed up with her corset and her overbearing father, but to you it's all the same. Her womb is probably wandering, disrupting her delicate feminine balance. Yes, that's an actual theory, straight from ancient Greece, still kicking around in your medical textbooks. You decide to prescribe a rest cure. Bed rest, no reading, no thinking, just bland food and isolation. Sounds relaxing? It's not. It's mind-numbingly oppressive, and it often makes things worse. If Eliza's lucky, you might stop at a dose of laudanum to calm her nerves. If she's not, you could recommend a more drastic treatment, like a cold water plunge or, brace yourself, vaginal stimulation, a common cure for hysteria performed by doctors with zero understanding of female anatomy or consent. Mental health treatment in the Victorian era is a dark corner of medicine, steeped in ignorance and control. If Eliza's symptoms persist, she might end up in an asylum, which is less a hospital and more a warehouse for society's undesirables. Asylums are packed with patients labeled as lunatics, idiots, or moral defectives, terms that cover everything from schizophrenia to epilepsy to simply being poor and inconvenient. You visit one of these institutions and it's a nightmare. Patients chained to walls, screaming, or sedated into silence. Treatments include spinning chairs to rebalance the brain, ice baths, or even trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull to release bad humors. You're skeptical of the more extreme methods, but you've got no better ideas. Psychology as a field doesn't exist yet, and your understanding of the brain is about as clear as the Thames on a bad day. You might feel a pang of sympathy for Eliza, but you've been taught that her madness is her fault, or her family's, or maybe just her biology. Either way, you sign the papers and she's carted off, likely never to return to her old life. Now, let's shift gears to another grim reality of your job: childbirth. You're called to a tenement where a woman is in labor and it's not going well. Childbirth in the Victorian era is a leading cause of death for women and infants, and you're walking into a battlefield with no armor. The room is cramped, lit by a single candle, and the air is thick with the smell of sweat and fear. The mother, exhausted and screaming, is surrounded by a midwife and a few neighbors, but they've called you because things are going south. Maybe the baby's breech or labor's been going on too long. Your tools? A pair of forceps, which look like giant salad tongs, and your own hands still grimy from your last patient. You don't know about puerperal fever, a bacterial infection spread by unwashed hands, but it's a death sentence for countless women. You might deliver the baby successfully, but if you don't wash up properly, and you probably won't, the mother could be dead within days. Midwives handle most births, but you're called in for complications, and your presence often makes things worse. Forceps, while sometimes life-saving, can tear tissue and cause infections. If the baby's stuck, you might resort to a craniotomy, crushing the infant's skull to save the mother. It's a horrific choice, but you've got no other options. Anesthesia is starting to appear, thanks to ether and chloroform, but it's rare in childbirth, especially for the poor. The mother's pain is considered natural, and you're more focused on getting the baby out than easing her suffering. If both mother and child survive, it's a miracle. If not, you mutter something about God's will, and move on, your conscience heavier than your medical bag. Let's take a moment to talk about the role of women in medicine, or rather, their lack of it. As a Victorian doctor, you're almost certainly male. Women are nurses or midwives, but they're rarely allowed into medical schools. A few trailblazers like Elizabeth Blackwell are starting to break through, but they face hostility and ridicule. You might work alongside a nurse, but she's untrained, often just a woman hired for her strength and willingness to clean up blood. Midwives, meanwhile, are losing ground to male doctors like you, who see them as uneducated competitors. The truth? Midwives often know more about childbirth than you do, but their knowledge is dismissed as folk medicine. The medical profession is a boys' club, and you're part of it, whether you like it or not. By now, it's late and you're back at your desk, sipping a glass of brandy to dull the day's horrors. You're starting to notice something. The line between doctor and patient is blurry. You're not immune to the diseases you treat. You handle smallpox victims, cholera patients, and tuberculosis cases daily, and you could easily catch any of them. Doctors in the Victorian era often die young, felled by the same diseases they fight. You might also be dipping into your own laudanum stash a bit too often, blurring the edges of your own sanity. The stress is relentless. Patients die, families blame you, and the medical community is cutthroat, with rival doctors ready to steal your clients or call you a quack. But there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The Victorian era is a time of transition. Scientists like John Snow are starting to connect cholera to contaminated water, not bad air. Joseph Lister is experimenting with antiseptics, though most surgeons laugh at his ideas. Anesthesia is becoming more common, making surgeries less barbaric. You might not live to see the full impact of these changes, but they're coming. For now, though, you're stuck in the messy middle where every patient is a gamble and every treatment is a shot in the dark. As you blow out your candle and head to bed, you can't help but feel the weight of it all. You're a Victorian doctor, part healer, part butcher, part showman. You're trying to save lives with one hand tied behind your back, armed with little more than leeches, laudanum, and a prayer. Tomorrow you'll do it all again because that's the job. It's bloody, it's confusing, and it's never, ever boring. Alright, we're back in the murky haze of Victorian London, 1845, and you're still a doctor navigating a world where medicine is as much art as accident. The night's grown colder, your medical bag feels heavier, and the stench of the city clings to your coat like a bad diagnosis. Let's shift focus now to one of the most chaotic and oddly theatrical parts of your job: public health. In the Victorian era, keeping a city healthy is like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. Disease is everywhere, sanitation is a pipe dream, and you're caught between clueless authorities and a population that's half sick, half skeptical. Let's dive into the mess and see why being a Victorian doctor means wrestling with problems way bigger than your scalpel can handle. It's dawn, and you're called to a meeting with the local Board of Health, a group of well-meaning but woefully uninformed officials tasked with keeping London from drowning in its own filth. The city's a cesspool, literally. Open sewers run through the streets, privies overflow into backyards, and the Thames is basically a giant latrine. Cholera's been ripping through the slums, and the board wants answers. You suggest cleaning the water supply, but they laugh it off. Water's fine, they say. It's the miasma from the river's stench that's killing people. You've heard whispers of John Snow's work. He's starting to link cholera to contaminated wells, but his ideas are fringe, and you'd risk your reputation backing them. Instead, you nod along as the board approves flushing sewers with lime to purify the air. It's useless, but it's something, and in Victorian public health, doing something is better than admitting you're clueless. Public health in this era is a patchwork of half-baked ideas and class prejudice. The poor are blamed for their own diseases. Crowded tenements, bad diet, and moral weakness are seen as the culprits, not the lack of clean water or proper housing. You visit a slum where families live 10 to a room, sharing a single bucket for sanitation. Typhus and dysentery are rampant, but the board's solution is to hand out pamphlets on temperance and cleanliness. You know it's nonsense. Soap and sobriety won't fix a well poisoned by sewage, but you're powerless to change the system. Your job is to treat the sick, not overhaul society, though the two feel maddeningly linked. Let's talk about one of your biggest public health headaches: vaccination. Smallpox is a scourge, leaving survivors scarred and countless dead. Edward Jenner's cowpox vaccine, developed in the 1790s, is a game changer, but it's not universally accepted. You carry a vial of cowpox matter, scraped from an infected cow, and offer to vaccinate families. Some agree, especially the educated middle class, but others, particularly the poor, think it's witchcraft or a government plot to poison them. You can't blame them. Trust is hard to come by when doctors like you are bleeding them dry or dosing them with mercury. You might vaccinate a child by scratching their arm with a lancet dipped in pus, a process that's as gross as it sounds. If it works, they're immune. If not, you've just given them an infection. Vaccination isn't mandatory yet, and enforcement is spotty, so smallpox keeps spreading, and you keep seeing its pockmarked victims. Another public health disaster is the workhouse, where the destitute end up when they can't survive on their own. You're called to one, and it's a vision of hell: gaunt faces, filthy straw mattresses, and the stench of decay. Workhouse infirmaries are where the poorest get treated, but it's more about containment than care. You see rickets in children, scurvy in adults, and tuberculosis everywhere. Your treatments, cod liver oil, a bit of broth, maybe some laudanum, are laughably inadequate, but the workhouse budget doesn't allow for more. Nurses, often elderly or alcoholic, do their best, but they're untrained and overwhelmed. You leave feeling helpless, knowing most of your patients won't make it through the winter. Now let's pivot to something a bit more personal: your own health. Victorian doctors aren't just fighting disease in others. You're at risk yourself. You're exposed to cholera, typhus, and tuberculosis daily, and there's no such thing as protective gear. Your only defense is a splash of brandy and a prayer. You've seen colleagues drop dead from fever caught from patients, and you know your own lifespan might be short. The stress doesn't help. You're on call constantly, juggling house calls, hospital rounds, and paperwork. You might turn to laudanum or opium to take the edge off, joining the ranks of addicted doctors who don't even realize they're hooked. Your diet, greasy pies and ale from street vendors, doesn't exactly boost your immune system, and the coal smoke choking the city leaves you coughing like your patients. By afternoon, you're back in the hospital where public health and private practice collide. A cholera outbreak has filled the wards, and you're racing from bed to bed, prescribing opium and saline solutions that don't work. You notice something odd. Patients from one neighborhood are dying faster than others. You sketch a map, marking cases, and wonder if the water pump on Broad Street is to blame. You're no Jon Snow, but you're starting to question the miasma theory. Still, you keep quiet. Challenging the establishment could tank your career. Instead, you burn some camphor to clear the air, and move on, feeling like you're fighting a war with a butter knife. Let's not ignore the social side of your job. As a doctor, you're a respected figure, but that comes with pressure. You're expected to be a gentleman, which means dressing well, speaking eloquently, and avoiding scandal. You attend dinners with wealthy patients, where you're half doctor, half performer, charming them with tales of your successes, while dodging questions about the ones who didn't make it. Your reputation is everything. Lose it and you're done. You might join a medical society where you debate treatments with other doctors, but it's less about science and more about ego. Everyone's got a pet theory, from mesmerism to hydrotherapy, and no one likes being proven wrong. As evening falls, you're called to a factory where a worker's been injured. Industrial accidents are common in Victorian England. Machines mangle limbs, boilers explode, and safety regulations are non-existent. You find a man with a crushed leg, and amputation is the only option. You set up in a corner of the factory, surrounded by curious co-workers, and get to work. The chloroform runs out halfway through, and the patient's screams echo off the walls. You finish the job, but you know infection is likely. You leave him with a bottle of laudanum and a slim chance of survival, wondering if the factory owner will even pay your fee. Back home, you collapse into a chair, your mind spinning. Public health in the Victorian era is a losing battle. Too many people, too little knowledge, too much poverty. You're starting to see the cracks in the system, but change is slow, and you're just one doctor. Tomorrow, you'll face another wave of cholera, another skeptical patient, another impossible choice. It's a brutal, bewildering job, but it's yours, and somehow you keep going. Let's dive back into the gritty chaos of Victorian London, 1845, where you're still a doctor slogging through a life as a physician where medicine is as much art as an accident. The city's pulse beats on, a mix of smoky coal smoke, desperation, and flickering gaslights, and you're bone-weary, tired but bound to your calling. We've covered the bloody surgeries, shaky diagnoses, and public health nightmares, but now let's peer into one of the strangest corners yet, the Victorian obsession with death, and the macabre side of medicine. As a doctor, you're not just fighting disease, you're dancing with mortality itself, in a society that's both fascinated and terrified by it. From body snatching to post-mortem photography, this is where your job gets downright ghoulish. Grab your lancet, and let's explore the dark underbelly. It's late evening and you're called to a grim task, certifying a death. You arrive at a cramped tenement where a family huddles around a body laid out on a straw mattress. The deceased, an elderly man, succumbed to consumption, tuberculosis, and your job is to confirm he's gone and sign the papers. You check for a pulse, hold a mirror to his mouth for breath, and nod solemnly. But death in the Victorian era isn't just an end, it's a spectacle. The family's already planning a funeral that'll bankrupt them, complete with black crepe, hired mourners, and a coffin they can't afford. Victorians are obsessed with good deaths, where the dying linger long enough to say pious farewells. As a doctor, you're often part of this theater, expected to ease the patient's passing with opium and offer comforting words about heaven. You dose the dying with laudanum, not just for pain but to make their exit look serene, because a peaceful death is a status symbol. But your role with death doesn't end there. Let's talk about the bodies. Medical schools need cadavers for dissection, but the supply is short. Only executed criminals can legally be used, and there aren't enough hangings to go around. Enter the resurrection men, body snatchers who dig up fresh graves and sell corpses to anatomists. You've likely bought one yourself back in medical school, dissecting a stolen body by candlelight while trying not to think about the morality of it. The Anatomy Act of 1832 is starting to change things, allowing unclaimed bodies from workhouses to be used, but it's controversial, and the poor fear dying in a workhouse means ending up on your dissection table. You don't like to admit it, but those late-night anatomy lessons are why you know where the liver is, even if you're still fuzzy on how it works. The public's fear of body snatching isn't just paranoia, it's a real threat. Families guard fresh graves, and some even use mort safes, iron cages over burial plots. You've heard stories of patients waking up in morgues, mistaken for dead, and you're careful not to pronounce death too hastily. But mistakes happen. You recall a colleague who buried a patient in a coma, only for the coffin to be exhumed later, revealing scratch marks inside. It's the stuff of nightmares, but you push it out of your mind. Death is your constant companion, and you can't afford to get sentimental. Now, let's dive into something even eerier, the Victorian fascination with post-mortem photography. You're called to a middle-class home where a child has died of diphtheria. The parents, grief-stricken, ask you to stay while a photographer sets up. The child's body is dressed in Sunday clothes, propped in a chair, eyes painted onto closed lids to look alive. The family poses around her, creating a memento mori, a reminder of death. As a doctor, you're used to this, but it's still unsettling, like staring into a frozen moment where something's not quite right. These photos are treasures to families, often the only image they have of the deceased, but to you, they're a reminder of how often you lose to disease. Your day takes a darker turn when you're asked to investigate a suspicious death. Poisoning is a Victorian specialty. Arsenic is cheap, tasteless, and available at any chemist's shop. A woman's died suddenly and her husband's acting cagey. You perform a crude autopsy, slicing open the stomach and sniffing for the telltale garlic odor of arsenic. Forensic science is in its infancy, and your tools are your nose, a magnifying glass, and a lot of guesswork. You might send samples to a chemist for the Marsh test, a new method to detect arsenic, but it's not foolproof. If it's poison, you'll testify in court where your word as a doctor carries weight, but not as much as you'd like. Poisoning cases are scandalous, splashed across newspapers, and you're wary of getting too involved. After all, a wrong call could ruin your reputation. Death also shapes your daily practice. You're back at the hospital where the dead house, morgue, is overflowing. Patients who die in the wards are whisked away quickly to avoid upsetting the living, but you spend time there, examining bodies to learn what your treatments did or didn't do. You notice patterns. Patients who died after surgery often have pus-filled wounds, but you don't connect it to your unwashed instruments. You're starting to hear about Ignaz Semmelweis, who's ruffling feathers in Vienna by suggesting hand-washing might reduce puerperal fever, but most doctors think he's a crank. You stick to your routine, but the seeds of doubt are there. By night, you're invited to a lecture at a medical society, where the topic is vitalism, the idea that life is driven by some mystical force. It's a reminder of how little you understand about life and death. Some colleagues argue for new theories like cellular pathology, but others cling to old ideas like animal magnetism or humoral imbalances. You're skeptical of both, but you've got no better explanation for why your patients keep dying. The lecture ends with a demonstration of a galvanic battery, zapping a frog's leg to twitch, sparking wild theories about reanimating the dead. It's pure showmanship, but it draws a crowd, and you're not above a bit of theatrics yourself to keep patients interested. As you stumble home through the fog, you're haunted by the day's deaths. The old man, the child, the maybe poisoned wife, they're all part of the job, but they weigh on you. Victorian medicine is a tightrope walk over a graveyard, and you're always one bad day away from a patient's funeral, or your own. You've seen doctors die from typhus caught in the slums or collapse under the strain. You pour a final glass of brandy, wondering if you're healing or harming, saving lives or just delaying death. The line's blurry, and in 1845, there's no clear path forward. Tomorrow's another day in this brutal, bewildering world. You'll face more bodies, living and dead, armed with little more than grit and a grimy scalpel. The Victorian era's a crucible, but it's forging something new. By the century's end, germ theory, antiseptics, and vaccines will reshape medicine. But for now, you're a doctor in the shadows, wrestling with death in a city that can't stop staring at it. We're back in the fog-choked streets of 1845 London, where you're still a Victorian doctor, battered by a relentless day of death, disease, and desperation. Your boots are caked with mud, your hands ache from gripping your scalpel, and the weight of your failures lingers like the city's coal smoke. We've waded through surgeries, public health disasters, and the macabre dance with death, but now let's turn to the final piece of your world, the slow, uneven march of progress. The Victorian era is a turning point, where medicine teeters between medieval guesswork and modern science. As a doctor, you're caught in this awkward transition, clinging to old ways while glimpsing a future you don't fully understand. Let's wrap up your day, and this journey, by exploring how change is creeping into your blood-soaked profession and why it's both thrilling and terrifying. It's past midnight, and you're slumped at your desk, a half-empty bottle of brandy beside a stack of medical journals. The candles burning low, casting shadows that dance like the ghosts of your patients. You're reading about James Simpson, a Scottish doctor who's been experimenting with chloroform as an anesthetic. You've used it yourself, clumsily, during amputations, but Simpson's claiming it could make surgery painless. It's a radical idea. Pain's always been part of the deal, a test of endurance for patient and surgeon alike. You're intrigued but wary. Chloroform's tricky, and you've seen patients stop breathing under it. Still, the thought of operating without screams is tempting, and you scribble a note to order more for your next surgery. Anesthesia is one of the first cracks in the old ways, a hint that medicine might one day be humane. Then there's the germ question. You've heard rumors about Louis Pasteur, a French chemist who's poking around with microscopes and talking about invisible organisms causing disease. It sounds like madness. How could something too small to see kill a man? Yet you can't shake the memory of your cholera patients, clustered around that Broad Street pump. Jon Snow's name keeps cropping up in journals, with his wild theory that cholera spreads through water, not air. You're skeptical, trained as you are in miasma theory, but you've started washing your hands before surgery, just in case. Joseph Lister's name appears too, with his carbolic acid sprays to prevent infection. Your colleagues scoff, surgery's always been bloody and infections are just bad luck. But you're not so sure. You've lost too many patients to hospital fever to dismiss it outright. These ideas, germs, antiseptics, are like distant thunder, faint but growing louder, and they make you wonder if everything you've learned is wrong. Your thoughts drift to vaccination. Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine is old news, but it's gaining ground. The government's talking about making it mandatory, though the public's still suspicious. You've seen the results yourself: fewer pockmarked faces, fewer dead children, and it's one of the few things you do that feels like a clear win. But progress is uneven. While vaccination saves lives, you're still bleeding patients for fevers and dosing them with mercury for syphilis. The gap between what works and what doesn't is maddening, and you're stuck straddling it, half healer, half charlatan. Let's not forget the tools. You pull out your stethoscope, a clunky wooden tube that's barely changed since Laennec invented it in 1816. It's better than pressing your ear to a patient's chest, but not by much. Thermometers are starting to appear, but they're slow and unreliable. Meanwhile, you hear whispers of new devices. Microscopes that show blood cells, machines that measure heartbeats. They're not in your bag yet, but they're coming, and they promise a world where diagnosis isn't just educated guesswork. For now, though, you're stuck with your senses and a prayer, hoping the rash you saw today wasn't typhus. As you flip through your journal, you notice an article on women in medicine. Elizabeth Blackwell's name stands out. She's just become the first woman to earn a medical degree in America. Here in England, women are still barred from medical schools, relegated to nursing or midwifery. You've worked with midwives, and you know they're often better at childbirth than you, but the profession's closing ranks, pushing them out. You're not sure how you feel about women doctors. Part of you thinks it's unnatural, part of you admires Blackwell's grit. Change is coming, whether you like it or not, and it's shaking the foundations of your male-dominated world. Your day's not quite over. There's a knock at the door, a final patient, a dock worker with a festering wound from a crate that fell on his foot. You clean it as best you can, dabbing it with carbolic acid on a whim, inspired by Lister's article. You prescribe laudanum for the pain and send him home, knowing gangrene's a real risk. As he limps away, you realize this is your life. Small acts of hope in a sea of uncertainty. You're not saving the world, but you're trying, and that's something. Finally, you snuff out the candle and crawl into bed, the city's hum fading outside. The Victorian era is a crucible, and you're in the fire. You're a doctor at a crossroads, wielding leeches and laudanum while the future, germ theory, antiseptics, vaccines, looms just out of reach. You're part of a profession that's killing as often as it cures, but it's learning, slowly, painfully. By 1901, medicine will look different, cleaner, kinder, more effective. You won't live to see it all, but you're laying the groundwork, one bloody, bewildering day at a time. This is the life of a Victorian doctor. A relentless grind of hope and horror, science and superstition, life and death. You're not a hero or a villain, just a man with a bag of tools trying to outrun the Reaper in a city that never sleeps. Tomorrow you'll rise, grab your scalpel, and do it all again. For now, though, you close your eyes, grateful for the quiet, and drift into a dreamless sleep, far from the chaos of 1845. We've reached the end of our journey through the grim, chaotic world of 1845 London, where you've been a Victorian doctor battling disease, death, and the limits of your own knowledge. The city's fog has settled, your candles burn to a stub, and you're finally in bed, the weight of the day pressing you into a restless sleep. But before we leave you to your dreams, or nightmares, let's reflect on what it all means. Being a Victorian doctor isn't just a job. It's a crucible that tests your courage, your conscience, and your capacity to keep going when half your patients don't. Let's close out this tale with a look at your legacy, the toll of your work, and the faint light of hope that keeps you moving forward in this brutal, bewildering era. As you lie in the dark, the faces of your patients flicker through your mind. The fevered mother in the tenement, the factory worker with the crushed leg, the child lost to diphtheria. Some you saved, most you didn't. Your successes, those rare moments when a smallpox vaccination worked or a wound healed without infection, are drowned out by the failures. The Victorian era is unforgiving. Medicine is a fledgling science, and you're more craftsman than healer, cobbling together treatments from tradition, guesswork, and a touch of desperation. You've bled patients to death, dosed them with poisons like mercury and arsenic, and sent women to asylums for daring to feel too much. Yet you're not a monster, just a man of your time, doing what you've been taught, hoping it's enough. The toll on you is heavy. Physically, you're a wreck. You're exposed to every disease you treat, from cholera to typhus, and you know doctors die young. Your hands tremble from too much laudanum, your cough might be more than just the city's smog, and your diet of greasy pies and ale is a slow poison. Mentally, it's worse. The constant deaths, the grieving families, the pressure to perform miracles with leeches and lancets. It's enough to break anyone. You've seen colleagues crumble, turning to opium or alcohol, or simply walking away from medicine altogether. You've thought about it yourself, but something keeps you here. Maybe it's duty, maybe it's pride, or maybe it's the stubborn belief that you can make a difference, even if it's just for one patient. Your legacy, though you don't know it, is complicated. You're part of a system that harms as much as it helps, rooted in classism, sexism, and superstition. The miasma theory you cling to is wrong, the bloodletting you practice is deadly, and the asylums you send patients to are prisons in all but name. But you're also part of a turning point. The Victorian era is when medicine starts to grow up. The seeds of progress, germ theory, antiseptics, anesthesia, are being planted, and you're brushing against them, even if you don't fully understand. You've started washing your hands, experimenting with carbolic acid, and pushing for vaccinations. These small acts, multiplied across thousands of doctors, will pave the way for a future where surgery isn't a death sentence and childbirth isn't a gamble. Let's zoom out for a moment. The world you're in is harsh, but it's changing. Industrialization is reshaping cities, science is challenging religion, and medicine is inching toward respectability. By the end of the century, Louis Pasteur will prove germs cause disease, Joseph Lister will make surgery safer, and vaccines will start to tame smallpox. Women like Elizabeth Garrett Anderson will break into medical schools, and nurses like Florence Nightingale will transform hospitals. You won't see most of this. You'll likely be dead by 1870, felled by tuberculosis or exhaustion, but your work is the foundation. Every patient you treat, every journal you read, every doubt you harbor about miasma or bloodletting is a step toward that future. Back to you in your creaking bed, the cities hum a faint lullaby. Tomorrow you'll wake to another day of chaos. There'll be a cholera case in the slums, a surgery in a crowded hospital, a mother in labor who might not survive. You'll grab your bag, stuffed with scalpels, laudanum, and a stethoscope that's more hope than help, and dive back in. You'll make mistakes, lose patience, and question everything, but you'll keep going. Because that's what it means to be a Victorian doctor. To fight a losing battle with grit and grace, knowing the war might one day be won. As sleep finally claims you, let's leave you with this. You're not just a relic of a grim past. You're a bridge between the dark ages of medicine and the dawn of something better. Your hands, stained with blood and doubt, are helping build a world where doctors don't just delay death but defeat it. So rest now, doctor. You've earned it. The patients, the plagues, and the progress will be waiting when you wake. We've followed you, our weary Victorian doctor, through the brutal gauntlet of 1845 London, from blood-soaked surgeries to the grim realities of public health and the eerie rituals surrounding death. You're still in that creaky bed, the weight of your day pressing you into the mattress, your mind teetering between exhaustion and the nagging sense that there's more to medicine than leeches and laudanum. But we've closed the arc of your day, and the city's claimed you in its restless sleep. So, let's shift perspective one last time, not to a new day, but to a deeper reflection on the human spirit that fuels your work, and the quiet, almost invisible ways you find meaning in this chaotic, often futile profession. Let's linger in this moment, exploring the personal cost, the fleeting victories, and the unspoken bond you share with a suffering world, before we leave you to your fate for good. The darkness of your room feels like a sanctuary now, a rare pause in a life that never stops demanding. The city's damp chill seeps through the walls, and the faint clatter of a passing cart outside reminds you that London never truly quiets. You're not asleep yet. Sleep comes hard when your mind's crowded with the day's losses. Instead, you're staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster, and wondering why you keep doing this. Being a Victorian doctor is a thankless grind, a profession that chews up your body and soul and spits out doubt. Yet here you are, still clutching your medical bag in your heart, ready to face another dawn. Let's peel back the layers of that stubborn resolve and see what holds you together. First, there's the cost, not just to your health but to your humanity. Every patient you lose takes a piece of you. The mother who died in childbirth, her newborn gone hours later. The boy whose fever you couldn't break. The worker whose leg you amputated only to watch him die of sepsis. They haunt you. You don't talk about it. Victorian gentlemen don't dwell on feelings, but the guilt festers. You've started to see your patients as cases, not people, a defense against the pain of caring too much. Yet it's imperfect armor. You remember the gratitude in a patient's eyes when you eased their pain, or the rare smile of a child who survived smallpox thanks to your vaccine. Those moments, fleeting as they are the stitches keeping your soul intact. Then there's the isolation. As a doctor, you're respected, even revered, but you're also alone. Your patients see you as a savior or a grim reaper, never just a man. Your colleagues are rivals as much as allies, quick to gossip or undermine you if your reputation falters. You've got no family to speak of. Medicine's demands leave little room for a wife or children. And your friends, if you have any, don't understand the weight of your work. Your only confidant is that bottle of brandy, and even that's starting to feel like a traitor, dulling your mind when you need it sharp. You've thought about quitting, maybe opening a chemist shop or moving to the countryside, but the idea feels like betrayal, not just of your patients but of yourself. What keeps you going? It's not money. Most of your patients can't pay, and the wealthy ones are fickle. It's not fame. The newspapers only notice doctors when they fail spectacularly. No, it's something deeper, harder to name. Maybe it's the flicker of defiance against death, the refusal to let it win without a fight. Or maybe it's the bond you feel with your patients, unspoken but real. They're the weavers, the dock workers, the mothers, the children, the heartbeat of this grimy city, and you're their last line of defense. When you sit by a dying patient's bed, holding their hand as laudanum eases their final breaths, you're not just a doctor. You're a witness to their life, their pain, their humanity. That matters even if you can't save them. Let's talk about the victories, small as they are. They're not the stuff of medical journals, but they're yours. The time you convinced a skeptical mother to vaccinate her children, knowing you spared them smallpox's scars. The fever patient who rallied after you tried a new saline solution, against your training. The moment you used chloroform just right, letting a man sleep through an amputation and wake to thank you. These are your anchors, proof that you're not entirely powerless. You cling to them when the failures pile up, when the morgue fills faster than the wards. They're why you read those journals, why you're starting to question miasma, why you dab carbolic acid on that dockworker's wound. You're not just a cog in a broken system. You're a man reaching for something better. That reach, that stubborn hope, is your true legacy. You'll never be a Pasteur or a Lister. Your name won't grace a hospital or a textbook. But every patient you treat with a little more care, every new idea you test, every hand you hold in the dark, it adds up. You're part of a quiet revolution, one that's turning medicine from butchery to science. The future, clean hospitals, safe surgeries, cures for tuberculosis, is built on your mistakes, your doubts, your dogged persistence. You're the soil, not the flower, and that's enough. As the first light of dawn creeps through your window, you stir. The city's waking, and with it, another day of blood, sweat, and struggle. You'll rise, splash cold water on your face, and grab your bag. There'll be a new patient, a new disease, a new chance to get it right or wrong. You'll carry the weight of yesterday's dead, but also the spark of tomorrow's possibilities. You're a Victorian doctor, caught in a world that's equal parts cruel and curious, and you're still here, fighting. So let's leave you now, not in sleep, but on the cusp of action. You're not a hero, not a villain, just a man with a scalpel and a stubborn heart, standing at the edge of a new day. The fog's lifting, London's calling, and you've got work to do. Good luck, doctor. You're going to need it. We've lingered long in the gritty, fog-laden world of 1845 London, shadowing you, our Victorian doctor, through a relentless gauntlet of blood, doubt, and reluctant hope. You're stirring now, the first light of dawn creeping through your window, pulling you from the uneasy rest that barely dulls the ache of yesterday's burdens. We've explored the chaos of your day, surgeries, public health failures, death's macabre rituals, and the slow creep of progress, but also peeled back your soul. Your isolation, your small victories, your defiance against a world that breaks more than it heals. Now, as you stand on the cusp of a new day, let's dive into one final chapter. The unspoken community that binds you to this city, the shared struggle of its people, and the quiet rituals that keep you human in a profession that threatens to strip that away. This is the end of our tale, where we see you not just as a doctor, but as a thread in London's tattered tapestry. The air in your room is sharp with morning chill, and your breath fogs faintly as you swing your legs over the bed's edge. Your body protests, joints stiff from too many hours on your feet, a cough that's lingered too long, but you ignore it. The city's waking, its pulse quickening with the clatter of carts, the shouts of vendors, the distant rumble of factory machines. You splash cold water on your face from a chipped basin, the shock grounding you for what's ahead. Your medical bag sits by the door, a battered companion stuffed with tools that feel more like relics than remedies. You don't know what today holds, another cholera outbreak, a mangled limb, a child's fever, but you know you'll face it because that's who you are. Before you step back into the fray, let's pause to see you in a different light, not as the lone healer battling death, but as part of London's living, breathing struggle. You're not alone in this city, though it often feels that way. London in 1845 is a beast of contradictions. Wealth and squalor, progress and decay, hope and despair packed into its soot-stained streets. Your patients are its lifeblood. The weaver with calloused hands, the dock worker who smells of tar, the seamstress whose eyes are failing from endless needlework. They're not just cases in your notebook, they're the city's story and you're woven into it. When you trudge through the slums, dodging puddles of filth, you pass their lives, their laughter, their fights, their prayers. The woman selling wilted cabbages nods as you pass. The urchin who once stole your handkerchief now waves. They know you not as a gentleman in a fine coat, but as the man who sat by their beds, who tried even when it didn't work. You're their doctor, flawed and fallible, but theirs. This unspoken community is your lifeline. It's in the cup of weak tea a patient's sister presses into your hands, or the gruff Godspeed from a porter as you leave the hospital. It's in the way a family shares their only candle so you can examine a wound, or how a neighbor carries your bag when you're too tired to lift it. These aren't grand gestures, but they're the glue that binds you to this work. You see it in the hospital wards, where patients, strangers to each other, share bread or whisper encouragement through the night. You see it in the workhouse, where a dying man grips your hand, not for medicine, but for the comfort of not being alone. You're part of this web, and it's what keeps you from breaking. Let's talk about your rituals, those small acts that tether you to something beyond the blood and brandy. Before you leave your room, you always do this one thing. You open your father's old watch, its hands still ticking, and trace the inscription inside. It's a reminder of why you started this. His pride, your promise, a life before the city claimed you. It's not much, but it steadies you like a sailor's knot in a storm. On your rounds, you've got others. You always pause at the hospital's threshold, a second to mutter a half-forgotten prayer, not for miracles but for clarity. When a patient dies, you light a match to burn a scrap of bandage in the alley, a private farewell no one else understands. And when the day's done, you write in your notebook, not just symptoms and doses but fragments of lives. Mrs. Ellis, 32, fever broke, smiled today. These are your anchors, your way of saying, I was here and so were they. Today you know what's waiting. A tenement where a typhoid case has spread, likely from the fetid well nearby. You'll try a new approach, boiling the family's water, skipping the calomel, maybe even quoting Snow's water theory if you're feeling bold. You'll visit the hospital where you'll use chloroform on a surgery, your hands steadier now with practice. You'll check on that dock worker, hoping the carbolic acid kept his wound clean, and you'll vaccinate a child, ignoring the mother's curses. You'll lose someone, a fever too fierce, a wound too deep, but you'll save another maybe, and that's enough to carry you to tomorrow. As you step into the street, the city swallows you. The fog's thin today, the sky a grudging gray, and you weave through the crowd, costermongers, clerks, beggars, all part of this messy, vital world. You're not a hero, you're just one man carrying a bag of half-broken tools and a heart that's still beating. But you're also more, a witness, a fighter, a thread in London's tapestry, stitching together what you can. The Victorian era is a forge, and you're being shaped by it just as you're shaping it. The future, clean water, safe births, medicine that works, is a distant star, but you're reaching for it one patient at a time. We'll leave you here, doctor, not in the quiet of your room, but in the pulse of the city, your coat flapping like a flag as you disappear into the crowd. Your story doesn't end, it lives in every life you touch, every question you ask, every day you choose to keep going. London's a beast, but it's your beast and you're its doctor. Stubborn, scarred, and strangely alive. Keep fighting. The dawn's here and the city's yours. We've walked with you, our battle-worn Victorian doctor, through the relentless, soot-stained streets of 1845 London, from the visceral horrors of your surgeries to the quiet rituals that tether you to a city pulsing with life and loss. Dawn's light has broken, and you're out there now, your coat catching the morning breeze as you vanish into the crowd, your medical bag a heavy reminder of the day's demands. We've seen you as healer, witness, and unwitting pioneer, part of London's gritty heartbeat, carrying the weight of a profession that's as much about enduring as it is about curing. But as we prepare to leave you for the final time, let's dive into one last chapter. The man beneath the blood-stained apron, grappling with the question that haunts every soul in this unforgiving era. What does it mean to keep going when the world feels like it's crumbling? This is the true close of our tale, a quiet meditation on your resilience, your doubts, and the fragile, stubborn light that burns within you as you face another day. The streets are alive as you move through them, the air sharp with the tang of coal and the faint promise of rain. Your boots click on uneven cobblestones, and you sidestep a puddle that mirrors the gray sky. The city's a cacophony, hawkers shouting, horses snorting, a distant church bell tolling, but to you it's a familiar rhythm as steady as a pulse. Your bag swings at your side, its contents rattling. Scalpels, stethoscope, a vial of laudanum you're trying not to rely on. You're headed to that tenement with the typhoid case, your mind already turning over what you'll do. Boil the water, check for fever, pray it hasn't spread further. But beneath the plan there's a deeper current, a question you don't voice but feel in your bones. Why do I keep doing this? You've asked it before in the dark hours when death won too many battles. The answer isn't clear, it never is, but it's there woven into the fabric of who you are. It's in the memory of your first patient years ago, a girl with a broken arm you set with trembling hands, her shy thank you, a spark that lit something in you. It's in the weight of your father's watch ticking against your chest, a reminder of a promise to make him proud, even if he's long gone. It's in the faces of the living, Mrs. Ellis's smile when her fever broke, the dock worker who might yet walk again, proof that your hands, flawed as they are, can still build something good. But the doubts are there too, heavy as the fog that clings to the Thames. You doubt your skill. Every death feels like a verdict on your failure. You doubt the system, the miasma theory that's starting to crack, the bloodletting you've begun to question, the asylums that swallow the desperate. You doubt yourself, wondering if the laudanum's clouding your mind, if the brandy's more foe than friend. These doubts are your shadow, trailing you through every house call, every surgery. Yet they're also your strength. They push you to read those journals, to try carbolic acid, to listen when a patient's story doesn't fit your textbook. Doubt, your learning, is the seed of change even if it feels like defeat. What anchors you more than anything is the city itself. London's a beast, cruel and unyielding, but it's yours. Its people, broken, resilient, alive, are your people. You see yourself in them, in the weaver who works through pain, the mother who fights for her children, the beggar who laughs despite it all. They don't give up, and neither do you. There's a silent pact between you, forged in shared struggle. When you vaccinate a child, you're not just fighting smallpox, you're fighting for their place in the city's future. When you sit with a dying man, you're not just easing his pain, you're honoring his life, his part in London's story. This connection, fragile but fierce, is what pulls you out of bed each morning. You pause at a street corner, catching your breath. A flower girl no older than 10 offers you a wilted violet, her grin gap-toothed and bright. You slip her a halfpenny, tucking the flower into your coat. It's a small thing, but it's yours, a reminder that beauty exists even here. You think of your rituals, the watch, the prayer, the burned bandage. They're not just habits. They're your rebellion against despair, your way of carving meaning from chaos. Today you'll add a new one. You'll stop at the river on your way back, toss a pebble into its murky depths, and whisper a name, someone you lost, someone you saved. It's not much, but it's enough to keep you whole. As you reach the tenement, the day's work begins. The typhoid case is worse, 2 more children are sick, but you dive in, your voice calm, your hands steady. You boil water, dose quinine, and talk to the family about the well. They listen, wary but trusting, because you're their doctor. Later, at the hospital, you'll wield chloroform like a weapon against pain, and you'll check that dock worker's wound, hoping for clean edges. You'll lose someone, a fever, a hemorrhage, but you'll save another, and you'll carry both with you, twin weights that balance your heart. This is your life, doctor. A tightrope walk between hope and heartbreak, science and superstition, life and death. You're not the hero of this story. London is, with its teeming, tenacious soul. You're just one thread, stitching what you can, breaking and mending in equal measure. The future, germ theory, clean wards, medicine that works, is coming, and you're helping it along even if you'll never see it bloom. Your legacy isn't in statues or books. It's in the lives you touch, the doubts you dare to voice, the city you refuse to abandon. We'll leave you now, not at day's end, but in its heart, knee-deep in the fight. You're in that tenement, sweat on your forehead, a child's pulse under your fingers, London's roar at your back. You're tired, you're flawed, but you're here, stubborn, a doctor, and utterly alive. Your story doesn't end. It lives in every life you touch, every question you keep, every day you choose to keep going. London's a beast, but it's your beast, and you're its doctor. Keep fighting. The city's yours, the dawn's bright, and you're here. We've shadowed you, our weathered Victorian doctor, through the relentless, grime-soaked sprawl of 1845 London, from the visceral chaos of your surgeries to the quiet rituals that bind you to a city teeming with struggle and stubborn life. You're deep in it now, knee-deep in a tenement's typhoid outbreak, your hands steady despite the sweat on your brow, your heart carrying the weight of every pulse you check. We've seen you as healer, doubter, and thread in London's tattered tapestry, fighting a losing battle with a scalpel and a flicker of hope. This is the final chapter of our tale, the moment we step back and let you fade into the city's roar, not with a grand finale, but with the raw, unpolished truth of who you are. A man who keeps going not because you're a hero, but because you're human, and this is your fight. Let's end with the heartbeat of your purpose, the city's claim on you, and a farewell that leaves you where you belong, in the thick of it, forever London's own. The tenement room is stifling, the air thick with the sour tang of sickness and despair. You're crouched by a child's pallet, her fever-hot skin under your fingers, her mother's anxious eyes boring into you. You murmur instructions: boil the water, keep her cool, no calomel this time, and hand over a vial of quinine, your voice a steady anchor in the chaos. The family trusts you not because you're infallible, but because you're here, sleeves rolled up, fighting for their daughter in a world that rarely fights for them. Outside, London hums, carts rattle, voices shout, life grinds on, and you're part of it, a single note in its jagged symphony. You step out into the alley, gulping air that's barely cleaner than the room you left. Your coat's heavy with sweat and soot, your bag a familiar weight on your shoulder. The flower girl's violet is still tucked in your lapel, wilting but defiant, like you. You think of the day ahead, the hospital where you'll wield chloroform with growing confidence, the dock worker whose wound might just heal, the vaccination you'll push despite curses. You'll lose someone today, a hemorrhage, a fever too fierce, but you'll save another, and that balance, precarious as it is why you're still standing. What is it, this thing that drives you? It's not just duty or pride, though they're there, stitched into your bones. It's not the faint promise of progress, though you feel it in the journals you read, the carbolic acid you've started to trust. It's something rawer, more elemental, the refusal to let the city's heartbeat falter. London's a beast, cruel and alive, and its people, broken, fierce, yours, are its blood. You're their doctor not because you chose it, but because the city chose you. When you set a bone, ease a death, or hold a hand, you're saying, you matter. This matters. It's a vow you didn't know you made, but it's yours now, and you carry it like a scar. The doubts still gnaw your failures, the system's flaws, the laudanum's pull, but they don't define you. They're the grit that sharpens your edge, the cracks where hope seeps in. You're learning to listen, to patience, to Snow's water theory, to the quiet voice that says maybe, just maybe, you're doing enough. Your rituals keep you grounded, the watches tick, the prayer at the hospital door, the pebble you'll toss into the Thames tonight, whispering a name. These are your defiance, your proof that you're more than the blood on your hands. You're not alone in this fight. The city's with you, the weaver who nods as you pass, the porter who shares his pipe, the child who waves from a doorway. They're your strength, your reason, your mirror. You see their resilience and find your own. When you vaccinate a boy, you're fighting for his tomorrow. When you sit with the dying, you're honoring their today. This is your purpose, not written in grand declarations, but lived in every step you take through these streets. As you move on, the city swallows you whole. The fog's lifting, the sky a bruised gray, and you're one figure among thousands, costermongers, clerks, beggars, all woven into London's pulse. You're headed to the hospital, then another house call, then another, each one a chance to mend what's broken in you and them. The future, germ theory, safe surgeries, a medicine that heals more than it harms, is a horizon you won't reach, but you're carving its path. Your legacy is invisible, yet it's in every life you touch, every doubt you chase, Every day you don't quit. This is where we park, Doctor, in the heart of the city's clamor, with you striding forward, eyes sharp, heart scarred but beating. You're not a legend. You're a man, stubborn and human, carrying a bag of half-broken tools and a vow to keep. London's yours, and you're its doctor, bound by blood and choice to this wild, wounded place. We leave you in mid-step, not at the end, but in the fight, where you've always been, where you'll always be. Keep going. The city's alive, the dawn's yours, and you're still here.